In Adobe Illustrator, there's a really basic tool called the Rotate tool. And there's actually a few different ways that the Rotate tool can be applied. So to illustrate those different ways, I've created this little velociraptor, and let's see what we can do with them using the Rotate tool. So using the black arrow or the selection tool, I can actually highlight my velociraptor and click R on the keyboard, and by default we get a pivot point to use the Rotate tool. And Illustrator puts the pivot point in mathematical center based on our geometry that is selected. So if we're happy with that default location, we can left click with our mouse and rotate around that pivot point. If we're not happy with that selection, we can click anywhere else on our canvas, let's say over here, one click, and we can rotate around that new pivot point. So that's a really basic way to use the rotation tool. If we want to affect just a portion of the geometry and leave the rest alone, we can actually use our white arrow or our direct selection tool and click and highlight over that tail. And here we only have one vertice, and the next vertices are at the base of the tail. So this is perfect. If we click R on our keyboard, we're going to have that pivot point placed on that one vertice. But again, we're not happy with that placement, so we want to move the pivot point to the base of the tail. So with one click, we can change the pivot point to the base of the tail, and we can left mouse click and rotate to a brand new position based on that new pivot point. So that's a really simple way to use the Rotate tool. Okay, there's actually another method that we can use the Rotate tool with, and that's if we want to do multiple iterations of an object around a pivot point. Like, so let's say it's a clock or a compass, something like that. So let's go ahead and showcase that. So let's zoom out a little bit. And before we do anything, let's do a little bit of math. Let's say I have my velociraptor here and I want 12 iterations around a pivot point. And off the top of my head, I don't know what the math is for that. So let's go ahead and click our calculator and let's type 360 divided by the number of iterations. In this case, we want 12. Let's hit equals and we get 30 degrees. A perfect, nice round number, easy to remember. So the first method is more of a standard method of doing this, and there's also another method to achieve the exact same thing, but it's actually my preferred method because you have a little bit more visual control over it. So let's go over the standard method of trying to achieve this rotation around a pivot point. So with object selected, let's hit R on the keyboard and hit Option, hold down Option at the same time, and wherever we place this new pivot point, that's where the pivot point is going to rotate, or where our artwork is going to rotate around. So with Option selected or Option hold down, we click once on the keyboard and a little pop-up menu for the rotate pops up. So we actually calculate that's going to be 30 degrees. And if we click off of preview, we can see our original artwork and the preview of where our artwork is going to move to. That's looking just about right based on our new pivot point that we put. So we're going to go ahead and click copy. And now we can see our original artwork and our new artwork based on the pivot point. So with the new artwork selected, if we go ahead and click Command D multiple times, we're actually repeating or duplicating that same function that we created the first time, that 30-degree increment based on this pivot point. So that's the standard method of rotating an object around a pivot point multiple times. Let's take a look at my preferred method of achieving the exact same thing. So we're going to move our velociraptor over a little bit, and to do this we actually need to create a perfect circle. So we're going to take our ellipse tool and we're going to place it on our artboard here. So the idea for this is where the center of the ellipse tool is, that's going to become our new pivot point. So what we need to do first, actually let's change this to an outline so we can actually see what's happening here. And what we need to do is we need to actually scale our ellipse tool past the bounds of the artwork that we want to rotate. So let's hit S on the keyboard, shift to constrain to make a perfect circle, and we're going to go a little bit beyond our artwork. So that's exactly what we want. So now, with both of the ellipse tool selected and our velociraptor, we actually can visually see where our pivot point's going to be. So now what we can do is go ahead and go to the rotate tool and go ahead and double click, and immediately it places our pivot point in the center of our ellipse, and we're getting the 30-degree increment. By default, it was already there from our last placement, and we can preview what that's going to look like. And so that's looking pretty good. So visually, we have a little bit more control over where that pivot point's going to be instead of this version where we're floating around and we're just guessing. So we can click copy, and we're going to do the exact same thing by hitting Command D about 11 times. And we get that rotation, same exact rotation effect. So just remember that we have multiple copies of our ellipse tool here. So just be sure to go ahead and select those, delete those, or actually maybe you want to keep one of them and you want to hide them so you can see where the perfect center point of that is. Up to you. So those are different ways that we can use the rotate tool inside of Adobe Illustrator. I hope this is helpful.